The morning sun over Rota Naval Air Station painted the concrete in harsh, unforgiving light. Elena Rodriguez stood at the edge of the flight line, watching the newer pilots gather around their pristine F-18 Super Hornets like kids on Christmas morning. Their flight suits were crisp, patches bright, and conversations loud with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to prove yourself twice. Elena's flight suit told a different story. The fabric had seen better years. Sleeves rolled to regulation length, but somehow still managing to look casual. Her boots were scuffed from countless walks across tarmacs like this one, and her helmet bag bore the weight of someone who'd been carrying it longer than most of the pilots around her had been flying. Another beautiful day for some real flying, she murmured to herself, adjusting the strap of her worn kneeboard. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was one of the most experienced pilots on the base, yet she hadn't been assigned to a primary aircraft in 3 years. Across the tarmac, Commander Jake Peterson stood with his back to her, briefing a group of pilots near the newest Super Hornet. His voice carried that particular brand of authority that came from having the right connections at the right time. Elena had served under Peterson for 2 years now, watching him climb the ranks while she remained mysteriously stuck in what he called support rotations. "Remember, people," Peterson's voice boomed across the morning air, "today's exercise is about precision and quick thinking. We're testing new protocols against our NATO allies, and I want clean, professional flying. No cowboy stunts, no unnecessary risks." Elena almost smiled at that. Peterson had never met a risk he couldn't talk his way out of taking. She'd watched him pass on challenging assignments, always finding a reason why someone else should handle the complicated missions. Yet somehow he'd managed to position himself as the voice of tactical excellence. Near the command trailer, a small crowd had gathered around the assignment board. Elena approached slowly, already knowing what she'd find, or rather, what she wouldn't find. The morning's flight roster showed 8 primary aircraft assignments, all Super Hornets, all going to the same pilots who'd been getting the prime slots for months. "Looking for your name, Rodriguez?" The voice belonged to Lieutenant Marcus Webb, one of Peterson's favorites. He was young, cocky, and had the kind of smile that suggested he'd never met a situation he couldn't charm his way through. "Just checking the board," Elena replied evenly. "Well, you might want to check the maintenance roster instead," Webb said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I think there's a desk job with your name on it in Hangar 3. Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the feeling of being dismissed before she'd even opened her mouth. She'd been dealing with comments like Webb's for longer than she cared to remember, each one a small reminder that no matter what she'd accomplished, some people would always see her as taking up space meant for someone else. "Actually," she said quietly, "I was hoping to get some flight time in. It's been a while since I've had a chance to show what the old girl can do." She nodded toward the far end of the tarmac, where a single F-14 Tomcat sat apart from the newer aircraft. Webb followed her gaze and laughed. "That museum piece? Elena, that thing's older than some of our pilots. Why don't you leave the real? Flying to those of us who are current on modern systems?" The comment stung more than Elena wanted to admit, but she kept her expression neutral. The F-14 wasn't just any aircraft to her. It was the plane she'd learned to master when most of these pilots were still in high school. She knew every sound it made, every quirk in its handling, every way it could surprise an opponent who underestimated its capabilities. "That museum piece has more combat experience than half the fleet," she said quietly. "Had," Webb corrected. "Past tense. These days it's about speed, technology, and staying current. Maybe it's time to consider whether you're keeping up with the evolution of naval aviation." Before Elena could respond, Peterson's voice cut across the tarmac. "All right, people, let's get this briefing started. Primary pilots, you're with me. Support staff, Hangar 3 for equipment checks." Elena watched as the chosen pilots filed into the briefing room, their conversations filled with anticipation and friendly competition. She wasn't invited to follow, wasn't asked for her input despite having more experience in tactical flying than most of them combined. Instead, she was expected to report to a hangar where she'd spend the day inspecting equipment and filing reports. As the last pilot disappeared into the briefing room, Elena stood alone on the tarmac. The F-14 sat in the distance, its twin tails casting long shadows across the concrete. The morning heat was already building, and she could see the shimmer starting to rise from the asphalt. She'd been patient for 3 years, waiting for someone to remember that she was still here, still capable, still hungry to prove herself in the air. But patience, she was learning, could become its own kind of prison. Walking toward Hangar 3, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to wait for permission anymore. The next time an opportunity presented itself, any opportunity, she was going to take it. The concrete under her boots felt solid and familiar, but something had shifted in the way she carried herself. For the first time in months, Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez wasn't walking toward another day of being overlooked. She was walking toward the moment when she'd remind everyone exactly who they'd been ignoring. The hangar assignment felt like exile. Elena spent the morning cataloging maintenance reports while the sounds of aircraft engines warming up filtered through the corrugated walls. Each roar was a reminder of where she should have been, in a cockpit, running through pre-flight. Checks feeling the familiar weight of a helmet and the anticipation of liftoff. Staff Sergeant Amanda Price approached her workstation carrying a steaming cup of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd been watching the same injustice play out for too long. "You know this is complete garbage, right?" Amanda said, setting the coffee down next to Elena's clipboard. The sergeant had been working the flight line for 15 years and had seen her share of politics, but Peterson's treatment of Elena was something that bothered her more each day. Elena looked up from her reports. "What's complete garbage?" "This," Amanda gestured around the hangar. "You sitting here doing paperwork while Webb and his buddies get their flight hours. I've seen your scores, Rodriguez. I've seen your flight records from before Peterson took over this unit. You should be leading those exercises, not cleaning up after them." The words hit deeper than Elena expected. It was one thing to feel overlooked. It was another to have someone else confirm that the situation was as unfair as it seemed. "Peterson has his reasons," Elena said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "Peterson has his favorites," Amanda corrected. "And his reasons usually involve keeping certain people visible while making others disappear. Question is, how long are you going to let him?" Through the hangar's open bay doors, they could see the flight line where ground crews were making final preparations. The Super Hornets gleamed under the morning sun, their surfaces reflecting the kind of precision maintenance that came with being the primary aircraft. Further out, the F-14 sat like a forgotten relic, its gray paint dulled by sun and neglect. "I heard something interesting this morning," Amanda continued, lowering her voice. "One of the NATO pilots requested a specific matchup for today's exercise. Apparently, some French pilot named Captain Laurent Dubois has been bragging about how American pilots rely too heavily on technology. He specifically asked to go up against old-school American iron. His words." Elena felt something stir in her chest. And Peterson laughed it off. Said we didn't have any pilots current on legacy systems who could give him a proper challenge. Told them we'd stick to the modern aircraft where we could demonstrate superior tactics. The dismissal stung, but it also sparked something that had been dormant in Elena for too long. She knew the F-14 better than any pilot on the base. She'd grown up flying it, learned its strengths and limitations through hundreds of hours that these younger pilots couldn't match. More importantly, she knew something that Peterson and his favorites didn't understand. Sometimes the older systems had advantages that newer technology couldn't replicate. "Captain Dubois is flying what?" Elena asked. "Mirage 2000. Fast? Agile? Everything the textbooks say should outclass a Tomcat." Amanda paused, studying Elena's expression. "Of course, textbooks don't account for pilot skill, do they?" Elena set down her clipboard and walked to the hangar's entrance. The F-14 sat about 200 yards away, its canopy closed, its twin tails angled like a predator at rest. She'd spent countless hours in that cockpit, learning not just how to fly the aircraft, but how to think like it, how to use its unique capabilities in ways that surprised opponents who underestimated what it could do. The maintenance records for that. "Bird are current, aren't they?" she asked. Amanda's smile was slow and knowing. "Completely current. In fact, I personally signed off on its flight status yesterday. Funny thing is, nobody's bothered to check the roster for who's qualified to fly it." Elena felt her pulse quicken. It was true. Peterson had been so focused on his preferred pilots and aircraft that he'd never bothered to remove her from the F-14 qualification list. Technically, she was still cleared to fly it on training missions. "Amanda," Elena said quietly, "what would happen if someone were to take that bird up for a routine training flight? Just to keep the aircraft current, you understand." "Well," Amanda replied, "as long as the pilot was qualified and the flight was logged properly, I don't see how anyone could object. Of course, if that pilot happened to be in the area when the exercises were running, and if radio contact was established," she shrugged. "These things happen." Elena looked back at her clipboard, then at the F-14, then at the hangar where she'd been spending too many days doing work that any junior technician could handle. The decision crystallized in her mind with sudden clarity. "I think I need to take a walk," she said. "Take your time," Amanda replied. "I'll handle things here. And Rodriguez, your flight suit's hanging in locker 47. Might want to grab it if you're planning that walk." Elena nodded and headed toward the locker room. For the first time in months, she felt like she was walking toward something instead of away from it. The F-14 was waiting, and so was an opportunity to remind everyone what they'd forgotten about the pilot they'd been ignoring. As she changed into her flight suit, Elena could hear the distant sound of engines starting up for the scheduled exercises. Peterson's voice echoed from the flight line, confident and commanding as he briefed his chosen pilots. He had no idea that his perfect exercise was about to get a lot more interesting. The call came through Elena's radio just as she was running final checks on the F-14 systems. Peterson's voice carried across the frequency with the kind of irritation that suggested his morning wasn't going according to plan. "Rodriguez, report to the command trailer immediately." Elena keyed her radio calmly. "Currently conducting pre-flight. On aircraft 114, sir. Request permission to complete checklist." The pause that followed was long enough for Elena to imagine Peterson's expression. She'd been careful to follow every regulation, file every required form, and ensure that her decision to prep the F-14 was completely legitimate. But legitimacy and Peterson's approval were two different things. "Negative, Rodriguez. Shut down immediately and report to command. That's an order." Elena looked out at the flight line where the exercise participants were taxiing into position. The Super Hornets moved with mechanical precision, their pilots confident in their superiority. Further out, she could see the French Mirage 2000 that had issued the challenge, sleek, modern, and piloted by someone who'd specifically requested to face what he considered inferior American aircraft. "Copy, sir. Shutting down." But as Elena began the shutdown sequence, her radio crackled again. This time it was Amanda's voice on the maintenance frequency. "Rodriguez, be advised that Captain Dubois has been asking specifically about American pilots qualified on legacy systems. He's expressed disappointment that no one's willing to accept his challenge using comparable aircraft." Elena's hands paused over the controls. The message was clear. Amanda was giving her the justification she needed. This wasn't about personal pride or proving a point. This was about answering a direct challenge to American pilots and capability. She keyed the radio again. "Command, be advised that I'm current and qualified on the F-14, and there's been a specific request for legacy system demonstration. Request permission to participate in the exercise." Peterson's response came back immediately, sharp and final. "Negative, Rodriguez. You're grounded from this exercise. Report to the command trailer now." Grounded. The word hit Elena like a physical blow. After 3 years of being sidelined, overlooked, and assigned to meaningless tasks, Peterson was now officially preventing her from flying. The injustice of it crystallized everything she'd been feeling into a moment of absolute clarity. She looked at the F-14's instruments, all reading normal, all systems ready. The aircraft was perfectly capable, and so was she. The only thing standing between her and the chance to prove it was Peterson's arbitrary decision to keep her on the ground. Elena made her choice. "Command, experiencing radio difficulties. Will attempt to resolve after completing required systems. Check." She switched off her radio and continued her pre-flight sequence. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her heart was racing with the enormity of what she was about to do. She wasn't just violating Peterson's direct order. She was potentially ending her career for the chance to fly one mission. Outside, she could see Peterson emerging from the command trailer, scanning the flight line with the expression of someone who just realized his authority was being challenged. Several other personnel were with him, including Webb, who was pointing in the direction of the F-14. Elena sealed her canopy and taxied toward the runway. The radio crackled with increasingly urgent calls for her to respond, but she kept her communications equipment turned off. She'd answer for her decision later, but right now, she had a mission to fly. As she lined up for takeoff, Elena caught sight of Peterson running toward the flight line, his face red with anger. Webb was beside him, along with several other pilots who'd been pulled from their own preparations to witness what was happening. Elena pushed her throttles forward, and the F-14's twin engines roared to life with a sound that echoed across the entire base. The aircraft accelerated down the runway with the kind of power that reminded everyone why the Tomcat had been legendary in its day. As she lifted off, Elena caught a glimpse of the ground crew below. Amanda was standing near the maintenance trailer, her arms crossed, and a satisfied smile on her face. Several other personnel were watching with expressions that ranged from shock to admiration. Elena climbed to altitude and turned toward the exercise area. Her radio crackled back to life as she reached the designated airspace. "Unknown aircraft, identify yourself and state your intentions." Elena keyed her radio for the first time since takeoff. "This is Dustoff, F-14 Tomcat, requesting permission to join the exercise." The silence that followed was broken by a new voice, accented and amused. "Ah, finally, Captain Laurent Dubois here. I was beginning to think no American pilot was brave enough to accept my challenge. Welcome to the party, Dustoff." Elena smiled inside her helmet. Peterson had grounded her, threatened her career, and tried to keep her from flying. But he couldn't. Stop her from reminding everyone what she was capable of once she was in the air. The real challenge was just beginning. Elena's F-14 climbed steadily through the Spanish sky, its twin engines humming with the kind of confidence that comes from decades of proven capability. Below, the exercise area stretched out in a patchwork of brown hills and deep valleys, terrain that would challenge even the most modern aircraft. "Dustoff, this is exercise control," came the voice from the command center. "You are not authorized to participate in this exercise. Return to base immediately." Elena recognized the voice of Colonel Martinez, Peterson's immediate superior. The fact that the colonel was personally involved meant Peterson had escalated the situation to the highest levels. Her career was definitely on the line now. "Exercise control. Dustoff is responding to a direct challenge from Captain Dubois. Request permission to engage." Before exercise control could respond, Laurent's voice cut through the frequency. "Colonel Martinez, with respect, I issued a specific challenge to test American capabilities against comparable aircraft. This pilot has accepted. Unless you are concerned about the outcome?" The challenge, in Laurent's words, was unmistakable. Elena could imagine the conversation happening in the command trailer. Peterson furious at being outmaneuvered, Martinez caught between protocol and the embarrassment of backing down from a foreign pilot's challenge. "Very well," Martinez's voice came back, tight with control. "Dustoff, you are cleared to engage. But Rodriguez, when this is over, you and I will have a conversation about following orders." Elena felt her stomach drop. Using her real name over the radio meant everyone now knew exactly who was in the F-14. There would be no hiding behind call signs or claiming miscommunication. She had officially committed to a course of action that would either vindicate her or end her career. "Copy, exercise control. Dustoff understands." She switched to the tactical frequency and immediately heard Laurent's voice, smooth and confident. "So, Dustoff, I finally get to face the famous F-14. I have studied your aircraft extensively. Fast in a straight line, but heavy and slow to turn. This should be educational." Elena smiled. Laurent's confidence was based on technical specifications and theoretical performance data. What he didn't understand was that the F-14 wasn't just about speed or agility. It was about using terrain, patience, and experience to turn disadvantages into strengths. "We'll see, Captain. I hope you brought your A game." "Always, mon ami. Always." Elena banked into the canyon system that formed the heart of the exercise area. The Mirage would have every advantage in open sky: superior maneuverability, modern avionics, and a pilot who'd clearly studied F-14 capabilities. But down in the canyons, among the ridges and blind spots, the playing field was different. She dropped to low altitude, using the terrain to mask her signature. The F-14 handled the low-level flight with steady confidence, its larger frame actually providing stability that the lighter Mirage might struggle with in the turbulent air near the ground. "Dustoff, I show you entering the canyon system." Laurent's voice carried a note of puzzlement. "Interesting choice. Most pilots prefer the advantages of altitude." Elena didn't respond. She was busy studying the terrain, looking for the features she'd memorized during countless hours of studying the exercise area. There, a narrow valley that opened into a natural amphitheater, surrounded by ridges that would create radar shadows. Perfect. "Come find me, Captain," she said quietly. Above, she could hear the Mirage's engines as Laurent began his search. The French pilot was methodical, professional, using his aircraft's superior radar to try to locate her, but radar had limitations, especially in terrain like this. Elena positioned herself in the radar shadow of a large ridge, her F-14 invisible, to electronic search. She could hear Laurent's frustration growing as his sweeps came up empty. "Very clever, Dustoff, but you cannot hide forever. Eventually you must come up to fight." Elena checked her position one more time. She was exactly where she needed to be, with multiple escape routes and the element of surprise. Now it was time to turn the hunter into the hunted. "Who says I'm hiding?" She pulled the F-14 into a steep climb, rising from behind the ridge like a ghost materializing from the landscape. Laurent's Mirage was exactly where she'd expected it to be, circling the valley, searching for an enemy that was no longer there. The tables had turned, and Elena was now behind the Mirage with a perfect firing solution. "Fox 2!" she called, simulating a missile lock. Laurent's voice came back, stunned and impressed. "Merde! How did you— Excellent, Dustoff, excellent!" As Elena watched the Mirage bank away in simulated defeat, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the pure joy of flying at the edge of her abilities and succeeding. The F-14 felt alive beneath her, responding to her commands like an extension of her own will. But the victory was about more than just outflying Laurent. It was about proving to herself that she still had what it took, that 3 years of being sidelined hadn't dulled her skills or diminished her capabilities. Her radio crackled with new transmissions, pilots requesting replays of the engagement, ground control asking for her techniques, and beneath it all, dead silence from Peterson's frequency. Elena smiled as she turned toward home. The real challenge was just beginning, but she'd taken the first step toward reclaiming her place in the sky. Elena's landing was smooth and precise, the F-14 touching down with the kind of grace that comes from hundreds of hours of experience. But as she taxied toward the parking area, she could see the crowd waiting for her, and none of them looked particularly happy. Peterson stood at the center of the group, his face a mask of controlled fury. Webb was beside him, along with several other pilots and what appeared to be half the base's senior staff. Colonel Martinez stood slightly apart from the others, his expression unreadable. Elena shut down the engines and completed her post-flight checklist with deliberate care. She knew this might be the last time she ever flew a military aircraft, and she wanted to savor every moment of the routine that had defined her career. As she climbed down from the cockpit, Peterson stepped forward. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, you are in direct violation of a lawful order. You deliberately ignored instructions from your commanding officer and endangered a valuable military asset." Elena removed her helmet and faced Peterson calmly. "Sir, I responded to a direct challenge to American pilot capabilities. The F-14 was fully mission-capable, and I am current and qualified on the aircraft." "You are not current on anything." "Until I say you are." Peterson's voice rose, drawing attention from across the flight line. "You have been assigned to support duties because you lack the judgment and discipline required for combat operations." The words hit Elena like a physical blow, but they also crystallized something that had been building in her for 3 years. Peterson's assessment wasn't based on her performance or capabilities. It was based on his need to control the narrative and maintain his version of order. With respect, sir, my performance record speaks for itself. I've completed more combat missions than most of your primary pilots, and my scores on tactical evaluations consistently exceed unit standards. Webb stepped forward, his expression smug. Scores from 3 years ago, Rodriguez. This isn't about what you used to be able to do. It's about staying current with modern warfare. Elena felt her temper flare, but before she could respond, a new voice joined the conversation. Excuse me, but I believe I can contribute to this discussion. Everyone turned to see Captain Laurent Dubois approaching, still wearing his flight suit and carrying his helmet. His expression was serious, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was enjoying the drama. Captain Dubois, Colonel Martinez said, stepping forward, I apologize for this disruption to your training exercise. Laurent waved off the apology. No disruption at all, Colonel. In fact, I wanted to personally thank Lieutenant Rodriguez for accepting my challenge. In 20 years of flying, I have rarely encountered such skillful use of terrain and tactical positioning. Peterson's face darkened. Captain, I appreciate your courtesy, but Lieutenant Rodriguez was not authorized to— Pardon me, Commander, but I specifically requested to face an American pilot using comparable aircraft. Your Lieutenant Rodriguez gave me exactly what I asked for, and she did so with exceptional skill. Laurent's tone was polite but firm. I have flown against many of your modern aircraft, but today I learned something new about the capabilities of experienced pilots using legacy systems. Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward the French pilot, but she also knew that his words, while supportive, weren't going to change Peterson's mind. Her commanding officer had been challenged in front of his superiors and peers, and men like Peterson didn't forgive that kind of embarrassment. Colonel Martinez looked between Peterson and Elena, clearly trying to find a way to resolve the situation without making either side lose face completely. Lieutenant Rodriguez, Martinez said carefully, while your performance was evidently exceptional, the fact remains that you disobeyed a direct order from your commanding officer. That cannot be overlooked. Elena nodded. I understand, sir. I accept full responsibility for my actions. However, Martinez continued, Captain Dubois has raised valid points about the nature of his challenge and the appropriateness of your response. I think this situation requires a more thorough review before any disciplinary action is taken. Peterson's jaw tightened. Colonel, with respect, this is a clear case of insubordination. Lieutenant Rodriguez deliberately— Commander Peterson, Martinez interrupted. I said this requires review. That means all aspects of the situation, including the decision-making process that led to Lieutenant Rodriguez being excluded from regular flight operations, despite her qualifications and experience. Elena felt a flicker of hope. Martinez was opening the door to something she'd never expected, a formal review of Peterson's treatment of her and other pilots. It wasn't vindication, but it was the possibility of a fair hearing. Amanda approached from the maintenance area, carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone who had information to share. Colonel Martinez, sir, I have the maintenance records for the F-14, including the complete flight history and pilot qualification listings. I thought you might want to review them. Martinez took the clipboard and studied it for several minutes. His expression grew increasingly thoughtful as he read. Commander Peterson, Martinez said finally, it appears that Lieutenant Rodriguez has been qualified and current on the F-14 for the entire time she's been assigned to support duties. In fact, she's the only pilot on this base who's been maintaining currency on the aircraft. Peterson's face went pale. Sir, I can't explain— I'm sure you can, Martinez replied, and I'm sure you will during the formal review I'm ordering into this unit's pilot assignment and rotation policies. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. What had started as a moment of rebellion had become something larger, a reckoning with the system that had been keeping her grounded. The crowd began to disperse, but Laurent approached Elena before leaving. Lieutenant, I hope you will continue flying. The sky needs pilots like you, those who understand that skill and experience are more valuable than new paint and modern computers. As Elena watched him walk away, she realized that something fundamental had changed. She was no longer fighting just for the right to fly. She was fighting for the principle that merit should matter more than politics. The real battle was just beginning. The review board convened 3 days later in a sterile conference room that smelled of old coffee and regulation fear. Elena sat at one end of a long table, facing a panel of 5 officers who would determine her fate. Colonel Martinez presided from the center, flanked by 2 senior commanders she didn't recognize and 2 base department heads. Peterson sat at the opposite end of the table, his dress uniform immaculate and his expression confident. He'd had 3 days to prepare his defense, and Elena could see from his posture that he believed he was going to walk away from this with minimal consequences. What Peterson didn't know was that Amanda had spent those same 3 days doing something that would change everything. This review will examine the events of 3 days ago, as well as the broader question of pilot assignment and qualification. Management within this unit, Colonel Martinez began. Commander Peterson, please present your account of the incident. Peterson stood and launched into a well-rehearsed narrative about maintaining discipline, following proper channels, and the dangers of allowing unauthorized personnel to operate military aircraft. His version of events painted Elena as a rogue pilot who had endangered equipment and personnel through reckless disregard for authority. Lieutenant Rodriguez has been assigned to support duties because she lacks the temperament and judgment required for modern combat operations, Peterson concluded. Her actions 3 days ago prove that she cannot be trusted with operational responsibility. Elena listened to Peterson's presentation with growing anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. She'd learned from Amanda that the key to winning this battle wasn't emotion, it was documentation. Lieutenant Rodriguez, Martinez said, please present your account. Elena stood and faced the panel directly. Sirs, I responded to a direct challenge from Captain Dubois, who specifically requested to face American pilots using comparable aircraft. I was current and qualified on the F-14, the aircraft was mission-ready, and I followed all safety protocols during the flight. But you disobeyed a direct order from your commanding officer, one of the unknown commanders pointed out. Yes, sir, I did. I believe that Commander Peterson's order was preventing me from fulfilling a legitimate operational requirement. I made a judgment call that I believe served the broader interests of American military capability and reputation. Peterson snorted. Convenient justification for insubordination. Elena turned to face him directly. Commander, you've kept me grounded for 3 years despite my qualifications and performance record. You've assigned me to support duties while less experienced pilots handle primary missions. I'd like to know why. Because you've demonstrated poor judgment under pressure, Peterson replied immediately. Your record shows hesitation during critical decision-making situations. My record, Elena said quietly, shows exactly the opposite. She nodded to Amanda, who was sitting in the observer section. Amanda stood and approached the panel with a thick folder. Sirs, I've compiled a complete analysis of Lieutenant Rodriguez's performance record, including flight hours, tactical evaluations, and mission completion rates over the past 5 years. Martinez took the folder and began reading. His expression changed as he reviewed the documents. Commander Peterson, Martinez said slowly, according to these records, Lieutenant Rodriguez has consistently scored in the top 10% of all pilots in tactical exercises. Her mission completion rate is 100%, and her safety record is flawless. Elena felt her heart racing. Amanda had done more than compile records. She'd built a case. Furthermore, Martinez continued, I see here that Lieutenant Rodriguez was removed from primary flight status following a single incident during a training exercise. The incident report indicates that she hesitated to engage a target during a simulated combat scenario. Peterson straightened. Exactly. Hesitation under pressure is unacceptable in combat operations. Amanda cleared her throat. Sir, if I may, I've also obtained the radar data and communications records from that training exercise. She handed Martinez another folder. The incident report states that Lieutenant Rodriguez hesitated to engage. The actual data shows that she correctly identified a malfunction in the targeting system and avoided what would have been a training accident. Her hesitation prevented a collision with the target aircraft. The room fell silent. Elena stared at Amanda in amazement. Her friend had uncovered the truth about the incident that had derailed her career. The instructor pilot's report recommended Lieutenant Rodriguez for a safety commendation. Amanda continued. That recommendation was overruled by Commander Peterson, who filed the incident report citing hesitation under pressure. Peterson's face had gone white. The targeting system was functioning normally. "Sir," Amanda interrupted, "I have the maintenance records showing that the targeting system was pulled for repairs immediately after the exercise. It had been malfunctioning for 3 days prior to the incident." Martinez looked at Peterson with an expression that could have melted steel. "Commander, it appears that you filed an incident report that directly contradicted the technical evidence and the instructor pilot's assessment." Elena felt the room shift around her. This wasn't just about one flight anymore. It was about a pattern of decisions that had systematically undermined her career. "There are other incidents," Amanda said quietly. "Mission assignments that were changed at the last minute, flight evaluations that were scheduled and then canceled, training opportunities that were offered to other pilots despite Lieutenant Rodriguez having higher qualifications." Elena watched Peterson's confidence crumble as the weight of evidence mounted. For 3 years, she'd believed that she was failing, to meet some standard, that she'd lost her edge or disappointed her superiors. Now she was learning that her career had been sabotaged by someone who was supposed to be looking out for her welfare. Martinez closed the folders and looked directly at Peterson. "Commander, you have some serious questions to answer. This review is hereby expanded to include a full investigation into your command decisions and personnel management practices." Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope, not just for her own situation, but for the possibility that other pilots who'd been unfairly treated might finally get justice. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in 3 years, she felt like she was winning. 2 weeks after the expanded review began, Elena found herself back in the same conference room, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Peterson was no longer at the table. He'd been relieved of command pending a full investigation into his personnel practices. In his place sat Commander Lisa Hayes, a no-nonsense pilot with a reputation for fairness and competence. Colonel Martinez looked more relaxed than Elena had seen him since the incident began. The investigation had uncovered a pattern of behavior that went far beyond her own situation, and the base was undergoing a complete overhaul of its pilot assignment and evaluation procedures. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," Martinez began, "the investigation has concluded that you are wrongfully removed from primary flight status based on false information and manipulated records. Commander Peterson's actions were not only unfair to you personally, but they deprived this unit of one of its most capable pilots." Elena felt a surge of vindication, but she kept her expression neutral. After 3 years of being told she wasn't good enough, it was difficult to fully believe that the system was finally acknowledging her worth. "Furthermore," Martinez continued, "the review board has recommended that you be reinstated to full flight status immediately, with backdating of your efficiency reports to reflect your actual performance rather than the distorted evaluations filed by Commander Peterson." Commander Hayes leaned forward. "Lieutenant, I've reviewed your complete record, including the actual training incident that led to your reassignment. Your decision-making was exemplary, and your technical knowledge prevented what could have been a serious accident. I would be honored to have you as part of my primary flight team." Elena felt tears threatening, but she blinked them back. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate the opportunity to prove myself again." "You won't be proving yourself," Hayes said firmly. "You'll be doing what you should have been doing all along, flying missions that match your capabilities and experience." Martinez shuffled through his papers and pulled out a new set of orders. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, effective immediately, you are assigned as primary pilot for the F-14 Tomcat, with responsibility for training other pilots on legacy systems integration. Additionally, you'll be leading a joint exercise with NATO forces next month. Captain Dubois specifically requested you as his American counterpart." Elena's heart raced. Not only was she being reinstated, but she was being given responsibilities that exceeded what she'd had before Peterson's interference. "There's one more thing," Martinez added. "The Air Force has been watching our integration of legacy and modern systems. They're interested in developing a program that combines the strengths of experienced pilots with older aircraft to complement modern fighter capabilities. Your performance 3 weeks ago has caught their attention." Amanda, who had been sitting quietly in the observer section, smiled broadly. Elena caught her eye and mouthed, "Thank you," receiving a subtle nod in return. "Ma'am," Elena said to Commander Hayes, "when do I start?" Hayes checked her watch. "How about right now? We have 3 FA-18 pilots who need to understand how to coordinate with legacy systems, and the F-14 is fueled and ready." Elena stood, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'll meet them on the flight line in 20 minutes. As the meeting broke up, Martinez approached her privately. "Lieutenant, I want you to know that this investigation has led to broader changes across multiple commands. Your situation wasn't unique. Peterson had a pattern of marginalizing pilots who didn't fit his narrow definition of acceptable. Several other careers are being reviewed and potentially restored." Elena nodded, understanding the weight of what he was telling her. Her decision to defy Peterson hadn't just changed her own fate, it had opened a door for others who had been similarly treated. "Sir, I just want to fly and serve my country to the best of my ability." "You'll have that chance," Martinez assured her. "And Rodriguez, that was some damn fine flying 3 weeks ago. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." 6 months later, Elena stood on the same tarmac where her journey had begun, but everything had changed. The F-14 behind her gleamed with fresh maintenance, its twin tails catching the morning sun like a bird of prey ready to hunt. Her flight suit bore new patches: Squadron Commander, Instructor Pilot, and NATO Exchange Program. The young pilot, standing beside her, fidgeted nervously with his helmet strap. Lieutenant David Chen was fresh out of flight school, eager to learn from someone he'd heard described as the pilot who brought down a Mirage in a museum piece. "Ma'am," Chen said, "I've studied the engagement profiles, but I still don't understand how you got behind him so easily. The Mirage should have had every advantage." Elena smiled, remembering her own early days when she thought superior technology automatically meant superior results. "David, what's the most important thing about air combat? Speed? Maneuverability? Radar capabilities?" "Patience," Elena replied. "The pilot who can wait for the right moment, who can use what they have instead of wishing for what they don't have, that's the pilot who survives and succeeds." She pointed toward the horizon where the exercise area lay hidden beyond the hills. "Captain Dubois is out there waiting for us. He's flying a brand new Rafale today, faster and more advanced than the Mirage he had 6 months ago. But he specifically requested to face the F-14 again." Chen looked puzzled. "Why would he want to face a disadvantage?" "Because he learned the same lesson I'm trying to teach you. It's not about the aircraft, it's about the pilot. Laurent understands that there's value in facing challenges that push you beyond your comfort zone." Elena's radio crackled to life. "Dust off, this is Laurent. Are you ready for round 2? Elena keyed her radio with a grin. "Always ready, Captain. Hope you brought your A-game." "For you, mon ami, I brought my A-plus game. Let us see if your—" "Student can keep up," Chen's eyes widened. "He knows I'm here." Laurent requested that this be a teaching exercise. He wants to show his own pilots the value of learning from different perspectives. Elena climbed the ladder to the F-14's cockpit. "Don't worry, David. You'll be flying the Super Hornet, and I'll be in the Tomcat. Between the two of us, we should give the Rafale a proper challenge." As Elena settled into the familiar cockpit, she reflected on how much had changed since that morning when she'd made the decision to defy Peterson. Commander Hayes had proven to be everything Peterson wasn't: supportive, fair, and focused on getting the best performance from every pilot under her command. Peterson himself had been quietly transferred to a desk job at the Pentagon, his career effectively ended by the investigation that revealed systematic discrimination and favoritism. Several other pilots had been restored to flight status, and the base's morale had improved dramatically, but the most significant change was in Elena herself. For years, she'd carried the weight of believing she wasn't good enough, that she'd somehow failed to meet the standards expected of her. Now she understood that the problem had never been her capabilities. It had been a system that valued conformity over excellence. "Dust off! You are cleared for takeoff," came the voice from the tower. Elena pushed the throttles forward, feeling the familiar surge of power as the F-14's engines responded. The aircraft lifted off with the confidence, of a machine that knew its worth, piloted by someone who had finally remembered hers. As she climbed toward the exercise area, Elena's radio crackled with Chen's nervous voice from the Super Hornet flying parallel to her. "Dust off. Any advice for engaging the Rafale?" Elena smiled inside her helmet. "Remember what I told you about. Patience, David, and remember that every aircraft has strengths and weaknesses. Our job is to maximize our strengths while exploiting their weaknesses." "Copy that. What about the F-14's limitations?" "The F-14 doesn't have limitations," Elena replied. "It has character. And sometimes, character is more valuable than specifications." As they approached the exercise area, Elena could see Laurent's Rafale in the distance, its sleek profile cutting through the Spanish sky with deadly grace. It was newer, faster, and more technologically advanced than anything Elena was flying. But Elena had something the Rafale didn't have: 3 years of hunger, 6 months of vindication, and a lifetime of proving that skill and determination could overcome any disadvantage. "All aircraft, exercise is live," came the announcement from exercise control. Elena banked toward the canyon system that had served her so well before, Chen following in formation. Laurent's Rafale climbed high, taking the altitude advantage that textbook tactics demanded. "David," Elena said over the radio, "are you ready to show Captain Dubois what American pilots can do when they're flying free?" "Ready, ma'am. Let's go hunting." Elena smiled and dove toward the canyons, the F-14 responding like an old friend who'd been waiting patiently for another chance to dance. Behind her, Chen's Super Hornet followed with the eager precision of youth learning from experience. Above them, Laurent's Rafale began its descent, piloted by someone who had learned to respect both the aircraft and the pilot he was facing. The sky opened up before them, vast and full of possibilities, and Elena Rodriguez flew into it with the confidence of someone who had finally reclaimed her rightful place among the clouds. For anyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told they weren't good enough, Elena's story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is simply to prove them wrong. She didn't need permission to be excellent, she just needed the courage to stop asking for it. The F-14 climbed into the morning sun, carrying with it the dreams of everyone who has ever refused to stay grounded. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.